Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Today is the day we do Mythbusters, and we do this with co-host Chris Rossini. And Chris, welcome to the program today.
Great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Well, good. What do we have on the agenda? What kind of myths are we going to dispel?
Well, we're going to talk about those drunken sailors in Washington, D.C. who have our money in their hands. There's a budget vote coming up. So we're going to talk about that and a few other things. So we'll start with when you ran for president, which I remember very clearly, and I was cheering you on as you were on the stage talking about actually cutting $1 trillion out of the federal budget. And even if you were to do that, they still would have trillions of our money to play with. But you were proposing that along with closing 5 federal departments. So if we could reminisce a little bit, Dr. Paul, and compare that to what we're facing today.
Well, we're facing bigger problems, and that's the way it's been for many, many years, and some people get lulled into sleep because of this, because people send out a warning saying no, and nothing happens in the sense it continues. They run up these deficits. Since 2008 and that crisis hit, we've ran up deficits over $12 trillion. We're up to essentially $20 trillion, and the spending continues. So I think that not much has helped over that period of time. I have had proposals to get rid of a few departments, and those departments included energy. And Chris, go ahead and take this for a minute.
Yes, I remember the departments that you were talking about, and I specifically remember Rick Perry proposing to close 3, and he forgot which ones they were, and you were standing right next to him trying to help him on the debate stage. So
these 5 that I wanted to that I proposed. And I hope I can remember them now and not be embarrassed, but they were energy and education, commerce, interior, as well as HUD. Of course, as we know, they weren't cut, and the spending continues. So this year, Obama's proposal for this coming year, which he gets to do at the end, is up to $4.2 trillion. Back in 2008, it was $2.5 trillion. So the spending is escalating, and of course we're in serious trouble for it. So I assume that this is going to continue. I don't see any signs that we're going to have less spending in the next administration.
Yes, I agree with that. And another topic that we were going to cover today is one that the mainstream media and many reporters, quote unquote, will not cover, and that's the Federal Reserve. They play a big role in this constantly increasing budget that we face. They are the enabler of the big spending Washington politicians. So it's important to always keep in mind that they have the printing press at their disposal all the time, and that's why they can make all these promises when they're out on the campaign trail. What do you think about that, Dr.?
Yeah, well, some people think there's a little competition and challenges between the executive branch and the Congress and the Federal Reserve, but no, they work together. They belong to the same group to finance deficit because they all believe in it. And the Federal Reserve is there to print the money when the Congress spends the money in order to get reelected. Congress will frequently then come back and say to the Fed, why do you have interest rates high? And they'll argue it's all the Fed's fault. And the Fed comes back and says to the Congress, you have these deficits and you force us to monetize it. Well, if you didn't have a Fed, we wouldn't have this argument. But because it's political, there's this argument that goes back and forth, who should do what. And that is where the problem is. But inevitably, the Congress and the President spends more money than they have, and they know darn well that the Fed will be under this pressure. And the word enabler is the correct word that you use, because without the Fed, they couldn't run up these deficits. That was the whole purpose of sound money. At the time of the beginning of our country, Jefferson wanted to have a prohibition against deficit financing. He lost that argument to the Hamiltonians. But he also wanted sound money, thinking, well, maybe if they can't print the money, and they had a rule against, emitting bills of credit, which is paper money, but that has been long ago forgotten. So the Fed is there, and the amazing thing is how long this has lasted, because it doesn't make any sense. But conditions are such, these kind of setups last as long as the people trust them. Paper money would be just great if nobody abused it and everybody trusted it and they followed it within reason. But that never happens. And we've had so many experiments with paper money and inflation in different manners, not always like our current central banks. But it always is abused, and therefore we may have to make the efforts to understand it. Because of this crisis coming, the more people that we can get to understand the Federal Reserve and the crisis, the better it's going to be. And that, of course, is why we have to have an audit of the Fed to really get the people's attention. Now, we're hoping in this new administration that Donald Trump will follow through with his strong hints that he would be for a audit of the Fed. But of course, there were times when he expressed, concern that they better not raise interest rate and try to punish me, things like that. So it represents, manipulation of the economy, deficit financing in order to finance welfare and warfare. And we, as a country, have been able to capitalize on this to a huge degree, and that is people take our dollars. So people complain that we have an unfavorable trade balance, but we're getting a really good deal. We print the money for these various reasons, and then we spend the money overseas, and they actually, fudge their figures to sell their products cheaper, and we get the products, products, and they get our paper. Then with their paper, they buy our debt. And then when things don't go quite well and things are coming unglued as they are now, then we claim it's their fault that we're having problems. But it is the fault of the Federal Reserve being able to print money that allows these huge deficits to continue. And that's a way of taxation. It's a form of taxation by just printing money. The inflation tax is stealing money from people by the value going down, and yet that is an absolute declared policy of the Federal Reserve. They say, well, we want actually more inflation as a deliberate policy. And, of course, they won't admit there's already plenty of inflation, but they want more inflation so they can steal money, and they want to collect taxes that way. It's a failed system, and we're going to know a lot more about this maybe during this next administration.
Yes, let's hope that President Trump doesn't forget about the Fed, that it's not just a campaign thing to get elected. And fortunately, bills were introduced by Representative Massey and your son, Senator Rand Paul. And speaking of your son, it looks like he's going to be the only Republican no vote to repeal Obamacare. Now, I know that Rand isn't a fan of Obamacare, so why Dr. Paul is going to vote no on repealing it?
This vote is very important to understand because it instructs the people on exactly how Washington works, and that's the way they do it in the swamp, and the swamp looks like they're still there, and it's manipulation, and it's to try to fool the people and get people to do things that they don't want to do. They come up with a budget which is outrageous, large and bigger than ever. And then they say, well, some people might not want to vote for this. How are we going to get all the Republicans? Because they pretend they're against deficit. So what they do is they put the repeal of Obamacare in the bill. We got them trapped. And the whole thing is the repeal of Obamacare, if this bill passes, the repeal, a clean-cut repeal of Obamacare is not going to happen. I mean, I'm all for it too, and I hope some good comes of it, but it's just not going to happen. But this is the way the process works, that they put people into this embarrassing position, and I've experienced that myself a lot of times, is they put something good into something really bad. So if you try to be fiscally conservative and vote against these spendings, then you have to vote for something very, very bad, like you vote against it, like repealing Obamacare. So this is political and legislative chicanery that goes on. It's commonplace. It looks like it's going to continue to happen. And Rand made the statements on the Senate floor the other day that the way this budget is written, it'll lead to $9.7 trillion of additional debt. We're already at 20. But the truth is he can estimate this. Nobody knows what it is. Nobody knows what these budgets are. Nobody knows what the revenues are. But these are decent, estimates. These are estimates based on current conditions. But the conditions can change. Revenues go down in recessions. Prices go up. All kinds of things. But the trend is going to continue. I mean, before 2007 and 2008, when I was running, it was outrageous to think of having a few $1 billion deficit. And then we had about 4 or 5 years. The deficit itself was over $1 trillion. It's dipped down a little bit now, but it's still creeping up again. It's over a $500 billion deficit at the height of our so-called recovery. But next year, the spending is really going to go up because it's been promised to. We have to build walls, and it looks like we'll have to get our payment for that later on. We have to rebuild the military because the Russians are going to invade us next week, and we have to rebuild the highways. And it's going to cost trillions and trillions of dollars. I think there's going to be an explosion of spending, an explosion of the debt, and more pressure on the Fed to print even more money. And I think we're going to usher in quite a few years of what is conventionally called inflation. That is, prices are going up. Real inflation is when you print the money, and then the printed money eventually pushes all the prices up. So I think that is what we're looking at. And the sad part is I don't know if Rand can get anybody else to try to make this point. Maybe we ought to be responsible and talk about spending, but as long as they think they can get away with it, they will. As long as they're supported by the intellectuals and also the media and all, and they've been teaching. The progressives and the Keynesians have taught there's nothing wrong with deficits. Deficits stimulate things, and monetizing debt is okay. But the whole thing is they have to look at what it's done long term, and that's why everybody's so unhappy right now, and that the labor participation rate is so high. That keeps going up. There's 95 million people who don't have jobs. This is the consequence of this. At the same time, our government tells us, oh, well, unemployment rate's 4.7. Everybody should be happy. Everybody's not happy because they're lying to us about this. I just hope we can get enough people to try to put the pressure on them so they'll quit lying to us about the danger of the spending and why we don't need a welfare state and why we don't need a warfare state. We need free markets and we need a national defense, but that's not what we have. We have endless spending, and all this is controlled by the deep state, the people who benefit from this, the financial markets, and of course the military-industrial complex. These are the people that are behind the scenes who put on the pressure, and of course we're all hopeful that will change, but it remains to be seen if we're going to have any significant change in policy.
Right, and if I may say, it's refreshing to see Rand be the only person to say no, because it reminds me of when you were in Congress and you earned the moniker Dr. No, because when they tried to pull stuff, you would stand on your own most of the time and vote no against it if it was unconstitutional. Let's finish up with some word games here. Donald Trump, we heard a lot during the campaigns about drain the swamp, drain the swamp. So, Dr. Paul, when you look at the proposed budget, about what's coming, and when you look at the policies that Donald Trump is proposing and the people that he's surrounding himself with in his administration, do you see drain the swamp, or are you seeing draining our wallets?
I think the nature of the swamp is changing. There's a little bit of an exchange here. You have military people coming in and financial people and banking interests and, like Goldman Sachs and the big banks. So the individuals are changing, but if you define the swamp where the people get stiff for paying all these bills, I would say, no, the swamp might even be getting bigger, but its nature is obviously changing. The people are changing, the people who are managing things. In some ways, when I look at this and see some of the appointees, I think that maybe the deep state is becoming more bold and moving into the government. You know, that they're literally, bold enough to say we're it and we're going to run things. Take a look at years ago, the conspiracy people who really would look to find out who's really orchestrating the philosophy that we have of welfareism and warfareism, and we always blame the Council on Foreign Relations. They were the really bad people, but they're moving right in. They're open now. They are on TV, and that used to be only a few conspiracy people who were bold enough to warn about the CFR. But now this is an accepted thing, and I think they have a lot of influence in Washington financially, in the banking industry, and they all believe that spending money is not a big problem. Now, we heard a little bit about that in the campaign, but we don't hear much about that now. The media, let's say that Trump has been inconsistent on it. Well, the deficit's too big, $20 trillion of debt. We have to do something about it. But, it's sort of totally forgotten. Nobody asks, Mr. Trump, you want to do this, and now you're not getting the money from Mexico. Where are you going to get this money? Is there going to be an explosion of debt? No, nobody's going to ask that because everybody thinks they're going to get benefit. And most people would like to believe, and because they're in a daydream, that, we do need to cut taxes, and I agree with that. If we're going to have this tremendous stimulation of the economy, and there'll be so many taxes produced, and actually we'll pay all these bills. Well, they've talked about that for a long time, and it doesn't work that way. And even if it did, let's say that cutting tax rates were beneficial for stimulating the economy. In short terms, and maybe some areas that might be true, but let's say it was magnificent. Let's say it was magic that you cut taxes and you tremendously increase revenues to the government. And I would say that's still very dangerous. You don't want the government spending the money. If there's a healthy economy because there's lower taxes, that means the money ought to be left in the economy, and it should go into the hospitals and the schools and labor costs and the various things like that. But that is not the case. That's why I don't like this idea that we're going to pay for this, by cutting rates on taxes. The other argument is. Well, we'll get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse because we know there are trillions of dollars, at least hundreds of billions of dollars of loss, and we hear those stories all the time. But, government is wasteful. I mean, it's the nature of government. Government isn't run like a business. That's why, the business people getting into government, this is a different story. It's not like running a business, believe me. They don't have to put up with the contest between the Democratic leadership and the Republican leadership. That just doesn't exist in business. All you have to do is, have contacts with certain types of politicians, get your way, and then you can survive. But I think I think the swamp is there. I think it's changing its nature. There's a few things I hear that I'm hopeful for. But I've been hopeful before many times. I remember in the early 80s, and I was a strong supporter of Reagan's in 76 and 80. But, I was pretty disappointed. There was an explosion of spending and an explosion of debt, which we survived, but it sort of delayed things. So I don't like this idea. Debt is bad. Sometimes you can delay it, especially if you have a Federal Reserve, especially if the rest of the world trusts our dollar. But that will come to an end. That's why we have to be realistic about what the government is actually doing. And I think the final say about the swamp isn't in yet. But right now, I would not be overly optimistic that the nature of government is going to change. I want more structural changes. I want people to believe in the marketplace, believe in contracts, believe in sound money, believe in constitutional government, believe that the government is there to protect our liberties, and not all this other mischief, not to run our lives and police our personal habits and not to police the world. That's the problem. So it's philosophical and structural, and I haven't seen that yet. I see modifications and changes in a few good words, but I don't happen to like protectionism and some of these other things that have been tried many times in the past. So it remains to be seen, but to me the most important thing is not claiming I know exactly what this administration will do, but trying to get people to understand the problems, because I believe we're going to have a major crisis. We're going to have to replace the system, not just Obamacare. We have to replace the system, the nature of government. What should the role of government should be? And it should be for the protection of liberty. It shouldn't be all these other things. And, of course, we had a pretty good guide, which has been totally ignored, and that's the Constitution, because the Constitution was a bill, a set of laws that said, thou shalt not, and it was prohibition of what government should do. But now it's been so distorted that we have no restraints by the Constitution on what governments do. So someday we're going to see this improve, and I'm still optimistic that in the grassroots, outside of the swamp, there's a lot more people understanding exactly what's going on, and that's where I get my encouragement. So, Chris, that'll take care of it for today, and I want to thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Paul.
And I want to thank the audience for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.